Greetings, Earthlings. This is CowTipper Vern again. Last year, I went on a YouTube interview series called Beyond Religion with my friend Mike. He's a fellow admin of the X2x2 support group on Facebook. I'll put a link down below for that interview if you're interested in listening to it. He invited me on because, as you would guess by the title, he talks to people who are 2x2s who have left religion, who no longer affiliate with religion and associate with religion or call themselves some sort of religious title or whatever. And I know that there's a difference between religion and belief, but I hadn't thought about it very much prior to going on. There's one question that Mike asks all of his guests, and that is what their beliefs are now. How do they feel now about their faith, essentially? I was trying to think of some funny hyphenated phrase I could come up with, like agnostic deist or something, or Christian something, although I'm not Christian anymore, and I've stepped away from that label completely now, for all of the reasons talked about in my Moment of Clarity episode. But I was trying to think of what to say, and I looked back at some of his previous guests, and I realized there's a theme on this channel. There's a lot of people who say, I don't know. I don't know what my beliefs are. I thought that was kind of interesting. It makes sense. Once you leave religion, you don't really need a title anymore. So you can just say, you don't know. Religion is typically where people get the title. A lot of times, the description of belief is downstream from religion. So when you don't have religion, the beliefs can kind of just be whatever. And I was trying to think of how to describe my beliefs, but I don't know what they are either. And that's interesting. I thought that was kind of a meaningful thing to think about because as 2x2s, we had to know. We always knew stuff. We knew all kinds of stuff that you couldn't possibly know. But we had to. It was part of the gig. It was part of being a part of something called the truth. You can't call yourself the truth if you have any question in your mind about any of it. So I've been thinking a lot lately about the phenomenon of needing to know really big questions, answers to really big questions, needing to feel like you understand and needing to feel confidence in them, and then transitioning to not feeling that way. That's a huge shift. It's a monumental shift in your life and your self-image to admit, I don't actually know. I don't know what I think or believe. I'm figuring it out. Maybe I'll know later, but right now I'm comfortable not knowing. We were never comfortable not knowing as 2x2s. Explicitly so. We always talked about knowing. It was a really big deal. It was a big part of our identity to know stuff, to know that we were on the right track. You had to know. Why else would you do any of what you were doing if you didn't know? Why be a 2x2 if you didn't know it was the thing to do, the correct thing to do, objectively? In your mind, anyway. Obviously, it's not objective. Most things are subjective. But we thought it was objective. We thought the Bible said you had to do it this way. So we did it. And we knew we were right. We had to know. It became a big part of our life. And any uncertainty that we had felt really uncomfortable. Because everyone around you does know. Or they're saying they do anyway. The workers preach, we know this, we know that. The more I thought about this transition from feeling like you have to know to being okay with not knowing, the more I realized what a big shift it was and how part of the painful part of deconstruction is going through this process. This episode today is going to be a CowTipper Vern Deconstructs episode because I'm going to talk a little bit more about religion and maybe a little bit less about 2x2 stuff. This is going to be more belief-based and CowTipper Vern specific. I'm going to talk more about how stepping away from religion has made me much more comfortable being authentic and honest around the fact that I don't know a lot of answers to big picture stuff. And how accepting that is a big step because it's so ingrained in us to not be that way. It's so much a part of our identity growing up as 2x2s. The other reason I wanted to talk about this is because sometimes I still act like I do know. I've noticed this about myself, and I notice it even in editing these episodes on this channel. I listen back through all the episodes as I'm editing them and cutting out stuff that doesn't fit or whatever, or taking out sounds that don't matter, or taking out words that don't fit or whatever. And as I listen to the finished product, sometimes I think, wow, I sound more knowledgeable, or that I think I'm knowledgeable. I sound more like that than I mean to. I don't mean to sound like I think I know what I'm talking about. This is really an exploration. This whole channel is just an exploration of ideas. And yet sometimes even the way I talk comes across as sounding like I'm some sort of authority, like it's a TED Talk or something. And I don't feel that way, actually. When I talk about this stuff, I do speak strongly sometimes, but It is just my opinion, and it's a work in progress. I reserve the right at any time to record another episode and say, I've thought this through a little better, maybe I've refined it, maybe I've changed my mind, I don't know. So that's why I've been thinking about this topic a lot. First, the idea that we grew up really needing to know a lot of stuff, and we needed to know the answers to really big questions, and we needed to feel like if we didn't know that was our fault somehow. And then the transition to not feeling that way, and why that's really difficult but important, at least for me. And all of it's kind of under the umbrella of, why do I always sound like I think I know what I'm talking about? I don't know. It's a funny concept. So I'm just going to talk about it for a while. I have a lot of notes on this thing because I've been taking notes for quite a while. And I have a lot of different ideas for different episodes, and they all kind of fall under this topic. So I'm just going to talk about it for a while. We'll see how this goes. Maybe I'll stop and make other episodes, or maybe I'll just run this all the way through and release it as multiple parts. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. I'm just going to talk today about my deconstruction around the idea of needing to know things. Uncertainty and my relationship to uncertainty as I deconstruct has caused me to take a lot of notes, write a lot of things in my phone. So we'll see how this goes. This episode is just about uncertainty and accepting the authenticity of uncertainty, and why I used to feel like I couldn't do that, or maybe as 2x2s we couldn't, or even as religious people in general, we can't. But once we shed that, we can still have our beliefs, and we can still make room for uncertainty in our beliefs, especially when it comes to very, very big questions, like eternity, like the meaning of life, stuff like that. We'll see how this goes. I'll try to keep this on the rails. Okay, so to my first point, as 2x2s, we had to know. I've talked about this before. I've mentioned it a couple different places, but I'll just put this all in one place. 2x2s think they have to know things. They think they have to know big picture things like eternity and the will of God, as it were, and all this stuff. It's explicit. Workers talk about this. When my kids were little and we were in a meeting, one of my kids would mimic workers, as kids often do. Kids often look up to the workers because they're told to, because families call them aunt and uncle, although we never did. We never did the aunt and uncle, however you want to say it. We never did that because it's ridiculous and silly. And even back then we seemed to know it. Should have been a red flag, but it wasn't. But my kids did admire the workers a lot, and my youngest would mimic this worker that we had. We had an older sister worker in the field, and she would often say, "We know something." When she was making a point in meetings, she would talk about that we know this. That was the premise for what she was saying most of the time. And so my kids would mimic that. My littlest kid would mimic that. My kid would sit there, then stand up holding a book and say, "We know, blah, 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 blah. We know, blah, blah, blah." And the words that came after that didn't even matter. That's how young this kid was. The kid would just say stuff, but always started every single sentence with "we know," because that's what my kid heard in meeting. My kids heard "we know." 2x2s consider knowing to be the same as faith. They're not allowed to have uncertainty. They have certainty around everything they do. That's why they're not open to feedback, and they're rarely open to any kind of change whatsoever. They know they're on the right track, and therefore, you can't tell them otherwise. They're on the right track cosmically. Everything they do is right because they're trying to follow Jesus and do what the Bible says and blah, blah, blah. They are the truth. They are God's children. The creator of the universe tells them what to do. So there's no room for interpretation here. There's no room for nuance. There's right and there's everything else. There's good, there's professing, and there's worldly and sinful. There's only two categories here. This is where exclusivity comes from. Sometimes I hear workers say that, "Oh, we don't think we're exclusively right," or whatever. I've heard a few workers in the last few years since the CSA scandal talk directly to the exclusivity. And they try to blow off that phrase, but there's a reason for it. Because they know they're right, and they know you're not, if you're not one of them. They know this stuff. Exclusivity is a drug because it gives you authority, at least in your own mind. So the people who are the most like God, which is the workers, the ones we think are the closest to God, and hearing from him directly to tell us what to do, they are exclusively correct. There is exclusivity. I've talked about that more, and so I won't dig into it anymore on this episode, but that's because they know. They have to know. They're exclusively correct. They are the truth, period. This isn't an episode about the 2x2s, though, because this is pretty common. I've actually seen some people in the X community talking about how they found the right way for real now. Like, they read the Bible correctly now. They know God's will for real. That exclusive 2x2 is wrong, but exclusive Christian is correct. And they still use that terminology, and they're free to do it. I'm not going to critique them personally or whatever. I just don't buy it. I don't buy into that myself because I feel like that still doesn't work for me. We all have different experiences around that idea, around the exclusivity idea. Even non-2x2s use that terminology. They don't say exclusive, they don't say exclusivity, but they do say one true way a lot. A lot of different religions use phrasing like that. You can't say that unless you think you really do know that it's true. A lot of people leave and have a hard time deconstructing that idea in particular because it's so ingrained in them that they have to get this correct or they'll burn in hell forever. That stepping away from that idea feels very uncomfortable at a visceral level. Deep down, it feels weird to say, I don't actually know. Leaving the 2x2s is probably similar to leaving a lot of religions that consider themselves the only way to get to heaven. Because knowing the truth becomes part of your identity. It is who you are on a fundamental level. So when you leave, you're not just changing how you feel about something, you're actually changing how you identify yourself in relation to the cosmos, in relation to space-time continuum and pending eternity. If you knew where you were going, and now you don't, that's extremely uncomfortable. People that leave the 2x2s have an identity crisis around this, and the identity that you develop around the idea of knowing affects everything else you do. It affects how you interact with the world. It affects everything right down to how you dress in some cases. 2x2s know that they're doing the right thing, so they don't do anything different. And when somebody questions why things are done a certain way, it's really interesting to see the responses from people inside the 2x2s. This is sort of why I got into looking into religious apologetics when I left, because I wanted to see people explain why they knew what they knew. And what I realized is that a lot of apologetics, well, let me say, I don't know if I should say I realized this. This is my impression of apologetics, is that it's not really explaining things, it's rationalizing them. And rationalizing is not the same as knowing. Rationalizing just means you're adding meaning wherever you need to make the story work. That doesn't mean you're wrong necessarily, but it definitely doesn't mean you're right. It means you have a good story that makes you feel better about what you're doing. When I looked into apologetics, I was expecting explanations, and what I saw was just the rationalization part. And that's why a lot of apologists can sit at the same table and disagree with each other. They're all reading the same things, but they don't understand each other's point of view. Because it's not an objective truth. It's just rationalization of a story, and it rationalizes how they feel. Their beliefs rationalize how they feel. 2x2s are like that a lot too. And that rationalization often has a lot to do with things besides the beliefs themselves. So I know I just started this episode, but quick sidebar already. In the X2x2 support group, we've noticed something that I didn't expect to see, and that is men and women leaving at completely different rates and at different times. Women are much quicker to leave the 2x2s. That's my impression. I don't have any data on that, but, well, and also I run a support group on a social media site, and women tend to use those sites more than men do, at least the one we use. So there's definitely some sampling bias here, but when I was younger, I used to think that men didn't need the certainty of religion, stereotypically, that men were less likely to. Let's just say that. I didn't expect women to leave quicker than men, and it makes sense now that that's the case, or that's what we see. Men and women have a different interaction with the 2x2s. Men have more place and more authority than women have. So when women leave, they're actually taking a step up in the world, and when men leave, they're losing what they perceive as their credibility and their authority. And a lot of that is tied to just knowing the Bible and knowing things. That's a topic for another time probably, but when I was younger, I used to think that men were less likely to be religious than women. At least that was my perception. I saw a lot of families that the women would come to meetings and the men would stay home. And I didn't really know why that was, so I expected that to be the case with people leaving too, that the women would stay and the longer for that reason, and the men would leave. And it turns out that that's not really true from our experience. It seems like the men stay longer because of that authority and because their identity is tied to knowing a certain thing, and knowing that thing gives them authority, gives them a place. So when people leave, it's not just that they've changed their belief system necessarily. It also has to do with the fact that there's things holding them in at different rates. And that's a different topic for a different episode. I want to do that episode, by the way. I really think that's an interesting topic, but we'll do that another time. But religion has an interesting grip on people for different reasons. And I wonder sometimes if men, and I'm painting with a huge broad brush on this obviously isn't true across the board, but I'm curious about this. I wonder if men are less likely to say, I don't know, to admit that they've changed their minds or whatever, to say that, hey, actually I was wrong about all this. I don't know. I wonder about that. Again, something to talk about later. One thing I do know is that guys really love knowing stuff. The word mansplaining came from somewhere, right? That's what this whole channel is. This is just me mansplaining stuff, acting like I know what I'm talking about, whether I do or not. Because men just like that. Men like the authority given them by what they know, what they perceive themselves to know. I remember being in conventions where workers would talk about the history of the Bible, and they would talk about science. Sometimes they would talk about different things that were tangentially related to what they were talking about. And that was always men doing that. That was all these older brother workers talking about, rationalizing Old Testament stories through fake science or some story they'd heard somewhere that made this thing make sense. The whole camel through the eye of the needle nonsense, that was always men who said stuff like that. I don't remember sister workers ever saying stuff like that. I don't know. I don't like gender stereotypes, but I think that one might be true. I think men like to know that they know stuff, like to perceive or feel like they're the authority. And so their identity might be a little more tied to certainty. Again, big, broad brush we're painting with here. But men like to mansplain. And by the way, men mansplain to each other. We do it all the time. We like to. We love sounding like we know stuff. And uncertainty isn't that fun. Uncertainty is bad vibes. We don't like to have uncertainty. We like to know everything that we're talking about. And we like to be experts on it. And then we like to tell people about it. And I think maybe that's why men have a harder time leaving the 2x2s, because there's authority granted to people who act like that. Men who stand up there and sound authoritative and speak confidently do really well in the 2x2s. The workers who do that become overseers. Okay, I got to get back on topic here. I'm talking about my own relationship to uncertainty, but understand it comes from that. I like to know stuff. I like to be the smart one. Whether I am or not is really up for debate. If you ask me, I think I know what I'm talking about. I like certainty. Anyway, growing up as a 2x2, and I imagine growing up in a lot of different religious systems, involves a lot of pressure to know because the stakes are really high. There's a lot of rationalization around religion, especially these days. There's a lot of people making a case for religion based on tangible societal benefits and all that stuff. That's not why people do it, though. I think that's why people stay sometimes. But most people believe what they believe, and they have a religion that sort of matches that. Now, again, chicken or egg, if they were born into that religion, they're more likely to believe that religion, and they're going to believe that that religion explains, or the doctrine of that religion explains eternity and explains all the big questions that they need explained. So if you think you have that, you've solved a very high stakes problem. You've solved a problem, at least in your own mind, which has been the topic of philosophical discussion as long as people have had written language. But in reality, we don't know. At least that's how I feel. I don't think I know anymore. I don't know more than I can demonstrate. I definitely have feelings and beliefs, by the way, and I don't talk about this much, but I definitely think there could be more to things. I'm not a materialist, at least not yet. I think there could be more. There could be an eternity. There could be a creator, but I don't know that. And so it doesn't really interact with my life that much. Knowing can send us down the wrong path in a lot of different ways. We can't know a lot of things. But if we have to know, because it's part of our religion, it's part of our belief system, and it's part of the community that we're in, if at least showing that you know, is part of the societal norm, or the community norm, I should say, the norm of your community, then you have to oversimplify. You have to start creating oversimplifications in your belief system to distill it down into something that you can explain. And that's actually fine, usually. There's some community you can build around those ideas. Not that different than you can build a community around being a fan of a sports team. We don't know a lot of what we think we need to know, but that's okay, because if we're around a lot of other people who kind of feel the same way, then there's some community fellowship there. There's some connection and perceived safety. Perceived, of course, but we think so. We think there's safety. Human psychology makes life livable via heuristics a lot of the time. We don't have the brain power to process all the uncertainty that we have to deal with, so we have to create heuristics. Those heuristics should be directed at safety. They're not always, though. Anybody coming out of the 2x2 system in the last couple of years realizes and has had to grapple with the fact that what they believed to be ultimate truth at one point wasn't even safe in a basic way. Many ex-2x2s have even talked very openly about the fact that, in hindsight, the 2x2 system was one of the least safe places to be. Because if anything went wrong, it still had to be true, and it still had to be right, and it still had to be of God, so you couldn't actually address it. That's what they're grappling with right now, still, inside the 2x2s, or refusing to grapple with. But since we don't know what we think we know, and we have to create heuristics around life to make life livable, being in a system like the 2x2s, and I would argue being in a lot of different religions, causes you to create and live by a lot of heuristics that might not be any good. There's a lot of universal rules to live by, and people make jokes out of them sometimes, like a heuristic or rule of thumb like don't take candy from strangers. 2x2s had other heuristics around people you don't know. Things like workers are good, workers are trustworthy. Well, if you grow up learning both of those things, you create a new heuristic in your mind like workers can't be strangers. Workers aren't strangers. They can be trusted. Essentially, you can take candy from a worker. A worker that you've never met before can sleep in your kid's bedroom because you know that they're okay. You're in a community that reinforces every day that worker equals good, so your heuristic leads you to think this is fine. An untold amount of tragedy has come from trusting people that shouldn't be trusted because you don't know. You don't even have access to information enough to know if anybody's any good, if they're good people, if they'll be good influences on you. But the heuristic you live by, instead of having any of the knowledge, leads you down the path of letting someone into your home that you don't know. I'm not saying that heuristics are true or not. I'm just saying you got to think about it. We just don't know. When we have little rules of thumb that we live by, that makes sense because our brains have to do that. We don't have the brain power to sit there and analyze infinite possibilities for every decision that we make in life. Not just the decision, but the downstream decisions, the downstream effects of it, the follow-on conclusions, the second, third, fourth order effects. We can't do that. It's too much work. It's too much of a cognitive load. So we have to sort of create rules of thumb to live by. But we should be careful about those. Heuristics tend to be downstream of the worldviews of whoever has them or creates them. So that's why 2x2s end up with a lot of bad ones, because they all come from the 2x2s. Individual judgment is pushed down. And that's why it's so uncomfortable when we leave to have our own judgment on things, to take responsibility, to stand alone on some of this stuff, to realize, hey, I don't know, and I'm going to sit here and take a step back because I feel unsafe in a certain way. Admitting that it is unsafe is a deconstructive step. Part of what made me want to do this episode is because I realized saying I don't know and feeling comfortable with it is a major, major milestone of deconstruction. Years ago, when I was leaving meetings, I couldn't say that. I couldn't say I don't know, because that would admit that I didn't know. It would admit that I don't have, what, knowledge or faith? It's really hard to admit that you don't know when you think you should. Not knowing is uncomfortable because it feels unsafe. I mentioned safety a second ago. It makes sense, obviously, to feel like you need to be safe, to strive for safety, to need safety. Determining safety on your own is a lot of work. So if you can develop heuristics and rules to live by, or you can be in a community that's all wrestling with the same issues, safety is easier to map. It's easier to find the safe route. If we see everyone else around us feeling safe and living as if they know and they're comfortable in their place, we're going to mimic what they do. And that's why the 2x2s have such a problem on their hands right now, because for 100+ years, they've lived as if they are safe and there's no problems. And they've also had a lot of problems. And so the people leaving are extremely damaged and traumatized, because even when bad things happened, they couldn't address it because they had to know they were right. 2x2 culture preyed on this idea of solving our uncertainty for us. And I would argue that a lot of religion does that. It solves the problem for you, it solves the uncertainty, and then it gives you an identity that gives you a place. 2x2 culture taught us we're safe inside, and the world is dangerous. And the world is anything that's not 2x2. I don't know if every religion does that. I'm not sure. I don't think so, actually. I've heard a lot of people talking about their religions. I've listened to a lot of, podcasts, interviews, blah, blah, blah. And not everybody says that. Not everybody is that exclusive. A lot of people are, but a lot aren't. And I think that's interesting. I'm not sure what ties them to their belief system then. That's a totally different topic. But the 2x2 is telling us that we were safe inside. We were safe in the fold, in the center of the fold. And everything outside the 2x2s was not safe. That's a real head trip. That's a hard thing to deprogram. It's a hard thing to work through because, especially when you've learned it from the very beginning of your life, it's ingrained in you. It's emotional, visceral. I don't even know the right words. It's in you. It's a response. You have automatic responses relating to those concepts. You'll feel unsafe when you're not. And you'll realize you feel safe when you're not. People who leave abusive relationships sometimes realize they get into other abusive relationships, and that's something you have to work through with a professional, because whether that relationship is with a significant other or a family member or your belief system, it can be a really bad pattern. You can constantly walk into abusive situations, and it's not your fault. It's wiring in our brains. It's how we were made. We want to seek what we think is safe, what is familiar. Familiar oftentimes feels like safety. And the 2x2s used this idea of safety as a counterpoint to uncertainty. So we had hymns where we sang that we were safe in the fold, while also constantly preaching that the world is this big, mysterious, scary thing, and using that narrative created uncertainty. So they would combine this idea that you're safe inside and you're certain inside. We know truth, we know safety. We know that you should be in the middle of the fold. And then if people leave, it's chaos out there. The world is unknown. It's unknown, it's uncertain, so it's unsafe. Now, most people would say, well, if you don't know, then you could learn, then you would feel safer. But they don't do that either. They don't want to learn. They want to read the King James Bible and pray about it, and that's it. And when you're not actually obtaining any new information, and no one's leading you through it, and you don't see other people doing it, you don't see other people adventuring out and learning and doing new things, or when those people do those things, you are primed to think that they're just living sinful, evil lives and they're on their way to hell, then of course you're going to go to the center of the fold. That's all you do. That's what you do. You go for the most safety possible by eliminating any uncertainty. You have to know. 2x2 culture teaches you to be paranoid, completely paranoid about the outer world, while simultaneously trusting anybody who's inside the fold, who's inside the 2x2s. Trust the workers. Let them into your home. Trust their advice. Trust the elders. Trust advice from people who have no experience in what you're dealing with, but have authority. Trust anyone based entirely on their proximity to the 2x2s. If they look right, if they sound right, that's all the certainty you need. You know that they are good. You know you can trust them. That's what the 2x2s teach, explicitly. Workers teach it to this day. The outer world is scary and unknown. Well, of course it's unknown if you don't go in it. Of course, deep down, we all know that we don't know things. We don't know more than we can see and observe and experience. And that's where faith comes in. 2x2s love using faith to paper over the idea that they don't actually know what they're talking about. Workers do this a lot. If we don't know, we don't question, we have faith. In fact, we sing a hymn that says, we have faith that questions not. You don't ask questions. Be willing. That's the key word, willingness. You don't know, you feel uncertainty, but you need faith and you need to be willing. Let me ask you, dear audience, what you think happens with an insular group that tells you not to look into the outside world for education, to only look inwardly to people who you are told to trust without ever validating, and you're told to follow them to demonstrate your faith and show that you're willing. What do you think is going to happen with a group like that? Maybe you already know. Maybe you've been paying attention the last few years as a giant SA scandal has enveloped the 2x2s. And maybe you'll also guess that they aren't addressing it because they can't. Growing up, we always felt like we had to know that the system was safe for us, but we didn't know that. And we couldn't verify it, and we couldn't validate it, and we were told not to. We were told never to question, so we have faith instead. That's all we have. Faith is a funny topic, and this is why I'm going to label this episode a CTV Deconstructs episode, because I want to talk about faith just for a minute. Faith is circular in the 2x2s, and possibly in a lot of different religions, in my opinion. This is my opinion now. This is my opinion of faith. In the 2x2s, we were always told we had to know. We were also told we had to have faith. I've said many places that it took me until well into my adulthood, until just a few years ago, to realize that I was talking about faith in a way that they were not talking about it. We had different ways of defining faith. My faith was believing things that perhaps I couldn't see and validate myself, and that is limited pretty much to things like the existence of God or the workings of the Spirit, things like that. But I always felt like I had to believe what I could see, and if I had access to information, there's no reason not to look at it because it's there. If the information exists and it's true, and God's creation is his creation, then the information has to honor him in some way. That's how I built my faith. So it was up to me to synthesize that discontinuity. And if I couldn't, I could still have faith in God, but I needed to update my model of the world. 2x2s don't do that, and I didn't realize that until COVID. Or maybe I did realize it, but I just didn't think about it. I was okay updating my uncertainty. If new information came, I could incorporate it into my worldview. 2x2s don't like to do that. They like to demonstrate their faith as a reason and as a mechanism to not learn more things and to not update their map, to not update their worldview. But they know. They still know somehow. Well, how do they know? If they don't learn things, they don't update their map, they don't update their information, how do they still know? Well, they know through faith. Faith is what papers over that obvious discontinuity. We demonstrate our faith by knowing even when we don't know. That's why even the language around this concept is difficult for me even to this day. I still talk about knowing things when I don't, and I have to recalibrate that a little bit and say, wait a second, this is what I know of the issue or the subject or the topic, but I need to update my understanding of it. I need to take in more information because I don't really know. Some of this is just my opinion, my thoughts, my ideas, my philosophy around it, whatever. But sometimes I don't know. I don't know what happens after we die. I don't know. I can have faith if I want to. I can have presuppositions about this stuff, but I can't make somebody else believe it because I don't know and I can't demonstrate it for them. 2x2s don't feel that way. To illustrate the point about faith in the 2x2s, I actually have a little story. And I told Mike and Abby that I would tell this story. Mike and Abby are my fellow admins on the 2x2 support group on Facebook. Years ago, after they had left meetings, I posted a snarky post on social media about a science article. I can't remember what science journal it was. I think it was a journal, maybe it was just a magazine. I'm not sure. I don't know how serious it was, but I saw this article that said something along the lines of, scientists say, if we meet aliens, we should greet them this way. We should talk to them this way. I have no idea what the article said. I can't remember, but I thought it was such a ridiculous thing. Believing Christian me was like, wait a second. You've never met an alien, but you already know how to talk to it? That's not science. That's you just making stuff up. Now, I still feel that way. It is just making stuff up, but it was fun clickbait for an article, and it got me to post it online, didn't it? I posted that online, and Mike and Abby commented on it. Of course, we've been good friends even when they were out of meetings and we were still in. So they felt comfortable critiquing me a little bit, I think. I hope I wasn't too much of a jerk about it, but I might have been. But the way I framed my post was to say that, why do scientists think they know stuff that they don't know? And Mike or Abby, and I can't remember exactly who first commented back to me, said, isn't that what religion does? And I said, no. No, that's not what religion does. Religion has faith. Faith doesn't mean you know. Faith means you believe something that you can't validate. That doesn't mean you know. And they both questioned me a little bit more, like, are you sure? Are you sure that's what faith means? Because it seems like Christians often say they know more than everybody else. That's why they're so smug about it all the time. There's so many smug Christians going around telling you exactly how everything works and how the world works without ever knowing or ever needing to validate it. They just know they're on the right team and they have faith. Sorry, that last bit was me talking. That wasn't them. They didn't say that part. They're nicer than me. They're much nicer than me online. I took their feedback seriously, though, because I thought, that's interesting. I don't think of faith that way. I think of faith as sort of a gaps thing. I think of faith as a filling the gaps kind of thing, a God of the gaps sort of thing. I can have faith in something that I believe is in those gaps in my knowledge, but if my knowledge updates, I will update it. I can still have faith, but that doesn't mean I have to give up my belief. I can still have my belief. I just need to update the model a little bit. Maybe the unknown parts of my life look a little different now, and that's fine. I should have paid attention to that criticism a little more. As I've gotten older, I realized they were exactly right. Part of my separation from religion has come around this point that I realize I'm going a separate way from them. Religion so often tells you you need to know this stuff. You know this. You make giant decisions in your life. You model your life around the concept of you knowing. Whether you know or not, you should just know. That's faith. If God speaks to you, you should know. Now, they never grapple with the fact that no two of them ever have the same story in their heads. But they do believe you should have a story in your head. Faith is funny like that. Faith is whatever people want to believe faith is. I left the 2x2s during COVID because I saw this exact same thing. And I won't dig into this anymore. I've talked about this ad nauseum, but that is my story. Realizing that people were ignoring what they could see in front of them because they had faith that it wasn't that what they were seeing wasn't real or something else. And their faith just turned into conspiracy theories. That's all it was. It was just denying reality. That's all their faith looked like. Well, I have faith that reality isn't real. Well, I don't. That wasn't my faith. My faith was to say, there's a lot of unknown. There's uncertainty. I don't know, but I can have faith. Their faith was, I have faith, so I know. That's why I left, because I realized that that was a dangerous place for me and my family to be. Faith to me just looks like certainty of self. You're certain that the thing in your head is more accurate than the reality in front of you. And that's just not what I believe. I didn't believe that. And when I realized so many 2x2s believed it, that's why I left the 2x2s. Essentially, if I had to distill it down, it was that. It's that I don't believe my faith looks like that. 2x2s deal with uncertainty and not knowing by saying, I have faith and pretending they know. And I don't do that. And I find that there's a lot of that in the religious world. As I looked out into the religious world and learned more about apologetics and things like that, I realized that was a big thing. That was a keystone. That was a key part of a lot of religious apologetics is, well, we just know this is true. It was rationalizing. It wasn't learning. It wasn't explaining. It was just rationalizing. And I can't live in that type of world. Of course, I don't know everything. Of course not. That's what I would need religion for. If I were to adopt religion again, it would be because I need that explanation to help me make better decisions in cases of uncertainty. And as far as I can tell, across the board right now, in the country I live in, religion is making people make worse decisions, but feel great about it. And what this weird version of faith seems to turn into for a lot of people is, here's what I believe, that's more real to me than reality, now prove me wrong. It turns into debate bro culture is what I call it. This culture of people arguing online or arguing on debates on YouTube or whatever, saying, I'm going to say a thing, you prove to me that I'm wrong. Well, that's not faith. That's not functional in any way. It's not even a functional conversation to have. I can't stand, this might be a sidebar, sorry, I cannot stand debate bro or just asking questions bro types of conversations. They're stupid. Nobody is less curious about the world than the person who's just asking questions bro. Anybody who invokes the phrase, I'm just asking questions, is not asking questions. Nobody is less curious about the world than just asking questions guy. Those people are never trying to resolve uncertainty. They're trying to feel like they can win an argument, and that's kind of it. It doesn't really work more than that. There's no point. There's no broader point than that. It's just an argument, and it's just for clicks. And I don't care about those people, and they're not interesting. And I feel like there is a lot of that in the religious world. A lot of, I already have an idea, prove me wrong, let's debate. Let's see which one of us can own the other one. And that's not interesting. Even a lot of apologetics is that way. At least that's my impression of it anyway. I don't know. I don't need to go any more into that. It doesn't matter. But all I can say is that it seems to me that belief isn't helping a lot of people because it's not being used to investigate or have a better worldview in the face of an unknown or in the face of a lot of unknowns, in big picture unknowns. We don't know a lot of stuff, and we might not be able to resolve it. That might be the point here. In fact, I think it is the point at the moment. That is actually the point to me at the very moment that I'm recording this. I think that we can't resolve a lot of big picture questions. I don't think we have enough information, and that might have to be okay. I don't see a religious system that helps me resolve that or live a better life. I think I'm a much better person after leaving the 2x2s. That's a weird thing to say, and I don't know if I want to get into that right now. Maybe that's a different episode. I think I'm a better person, dad, husband, friend, because I left the 2x2s. Because I have to deal with what I know, and I have to stand on my own. I have to own the ideas that I have, and I have to face uncertainty with the best tools that I have. Truth might be unknowable. And if big picture truth is unknowable, I don't get to just swing my belief around like a cudgel and smack people with it to make myself feel better. It doesn't work. Certainty is so much a part of so many people's identity, though, or maybe all of us. Maybe we're all like that. Maybe certainty is just a part of our identities. And it's a part that I want to deconstruct for myself. Because I don't actually know. I know stuff. I know things. We all do. But I don't know everything, and I don't know the big picture things. Not yet, anyway. I feel like the older I get, the less I know, too. I feel like I've changed my mind on almost everything in life. And not just big picture things, but even small picture things, even just day-to-day things. So many of the assumptions I had when I was younger, I got older and got some experience and had kids and a couple dogs and some minivans and a job. And all of a sudden, I don't feel the same as I used to feel. But I also feel less confident. I feel less confident that I have all the answers for stuff the older I get. And leaving the 2x2s has really shined a light on that for me, because I left the 2x2s right as my kids were getting old enough to ask questions, and I've had to deal with that a lot. I have another idea for an episode I'm going to do later about parenting and how leaving the 2x2s has changed how I parent. I think that's an interesting topic and a valid topic. I think it's a topic that is worth digging into a little bit. I won't do that now, but it's something I think about a lot. Sometimes I wonder, if I was still in, how would I be handling parenting? How would I be handling life? I don't know. Hey everybody, this is Editing CowTipper Vern. As I edit this one, I realize it's getting pretty long, and so I think I'm going to stop here and release this as part 1, and I'll put out another part 2 in a couple of days. So check back soon for that one, and I'll see you again real soon.